Hello, everyone, and welcome to our workshop on how to do research and get published. Today, we're focusing on what happens after you publish an academic article, specifically what you can do to promote yourself and potentially impact policy. To get us started today, I'd like to introduce you to the team who will be presenting. We're joined today by Julianne Barron, the Executive Director of the Federation of Associations in Behavioral and Brain Sciences, or FABS, a coalition of 29 scientific societies and nearly 60 academic departments. FABS serves as a resource to scientists interested in engaging with policymakers to connect research to policy. We're also joined by Sophie Boddington, a senior marketing executive for hybrid journals at Sage, with previous experience in trade publishing for HarperCollins Publishers. In her role within the product marketing team, Sophie works with editors, designers, and fellow marketers to ensure research reaches its intended audience through a range of digital and traditional marketing strategies. We're also joined by Michael Todd, the Social Science Communications Manager for Sage and the editor of the Social Science-based website. He's a longtime newspaper editor and reporter whose beats included the U.S. military, primary and secondary education, government, and business. And last, my name is Sean Scarisbrick. I'm a marketing manager on the author marketing team at Sage. My primary role is to provide support to authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process, with a particular focus on providing targeted resources to provide support at the appropriate time in the publication process. Today, as we go through the webinar, please submit your questions to us. The first part of the webinar today will be a presentation, and the second half will be a Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a toggle for a Q&A box. Please submit any of the questions there that you'd like to ask to us. We will start with those that have the most likes. So if you see any in particular that you find interesting, please do like them. Now, to get us started, you'll see a chart which illustrates the timeline of a typical author journey, moving from the early stages of securing funding and conducting research all the way through peer review and publication. Today, we're focusing specifically on how to promote your article. We encourage you to go back and watch recordings of other topics we've covered in the series, including how to format a manuscript and how to navigate the peer review process. And with that, I'll pass it off to Michael.
Thanks, Sean. So as the graphic just showed, it takes a lot of work to get research that is publishable. And of course, it takes a long time after you turn in your research before you actually see it in print or online. Wearing my journalist hat, I can remember talking to various academics about pieces that they've had, and they've actually forgotten it because they've moved on by the time it's actually published. But once your work is not over, once you've been told that your paper is published, your research and the journal will be promoted through the marketing team done at Sage. But this is really only one piece of the puzzle. It's integral that authors, and when I say authors, I mean you, also promote that content. So there's reasons why you want to do this, and your first instinct is always going to be, but I do the research, that I'm not responsible, that this is not my job. Well, sadly, at this point, it is becoming your job. So among the things that we will do as a publisher, though, is we'll ensure that articles are accessible and discoverable. But the extra push that you do is really what's going to make the real difference. And I don't mean to short sell our efforts, but you are the one that makes things happen. And so what you want to do is you want to reach an engaged audience. And so you'll have great contacts in your immediate network. And so you want to do that. You want to reach out to them and have them share and then also interact with your piece. They will want to support you in your research. But keep in mind, nobody is more interested in your research than you are. And then the direct contact would be great for doing that, but it's often not available to publishers and journal editors. So it's just like, again, that's the thing that you bring to it. And we can encourage people to read content and we'll ensure it's discoverable. But if you say to a close friend, read my article, it's much more likely that they will. Now, that's just your target, your people. You want to target diverse audiences. So there's people beyond your immediate circle, of course, and you have access to those people, but you don't always realize that you have access to them. So this is contact from your institution, so your own, if you're at a university, your university press office, who will be there. But keep in mind, they may not necessarily be expert in your own subject area, but they will still be interested in your work. And then Lastly, we want to make sure that we impact people that are outside of academia. So that would be policymakers and journalists. So when we talk about writing for a wider audience, what are we really doing? So we're trying to enrich the public discourse and share public knowledge. So this is important. We're trying to explain big problems, and we're trying to offer solutions. We're trying to give academics a voice in scientific, cultural, and clinical debates. And keep in mind, this is we talk about imposter syndrome. Everybody suffers to a greater or lesser extent from imposter syndrome. So keep in mind that you're not the only one. Your voice matters. Your voice has resonance. You want to raise, and speaking of your voice, you want to raise your personal profile. And you can do this in articles, you can do it in interviews, you can be on podcasts, you can be in webinars, you can do things like that. You can expand your network in unexpected ways. And one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit is policy. And it's like, this is a way that maybe you didn't automatically anticipate, but it will come to fruition. And you can, there's different types of stories that you can do. You might be contacted to address certain things that it's not about you in particular, but it's just about things that you are interested in or that you are expert in. And for a larger story, or it can be a story about your own research itself. There's new research. Again, that's that explainer topical issue. And then also you might be asked to do your own personal story. So this will not only are you going to enrich the public debate, but you're going to enrich your personal brand. And I'm sorry if that kind of language is toxic to you, but it's important. It's just like you do have a personal brand, and it is important. So I'm happy to address this more in a different way. And if you are interested in it, please reach out to us at Sage about some of these things. But moving on, so how do you talk about your research after it's published? So in the words of Glenn Ross, always be closing. You always be thinking about this. Have an elevator pitch. Have your 60-second, this is what it is. Try and do it in English. And when I say in English, I don't mean for Anglophone audience. I mean, try and do it in colloquial English. This is really important that you're able to do this. Keep in mind that you don't try and tell the whole story. As Voltaire said, the quickest way to be a bore is to tell everything that you know. Do not try and tell everything you know. Pick out the main points and do that. Write it down and kind of think about having a speech prepared just in case. These are important things. And then tailor it for who you are dealing with. So again, I talked about doing it in English. If you have a lot of jargon in it, remember that people are not necessarily going to understand your jargon or your form of expertise. And this includes other people in academia. So just keep that in mind. Be conversational. And then if you speak more than one language, by all means, please also do this. I realize that English is one of the key languages for academic discourse, but if you speak more than one language, do not ignore your home language. Do not ignore your mother tongue. Please do that. And having said that, I'd like to pass it back to Sean.
Thank you, Michael. So today, in particular, we'll talk about 3 different avenues that you may use to promote your research. So what we've called passive promotion is the type of work that requires little effort, but article promotion, more active promotion, will take a little bit more work. And when we talk about brand building, we're suggesting that you use your work to develop a personal brand and establish expertise in your subject area. This is also a topic that we've covered in another How to Do Research and Get Published webinar, so I'd recommend you revisit that one for further information. But to get us kickstarted, let's talk about passive promotion. So as mentioned, these activities are light touch for you as an author, but can have very, very strong benefits. So sharing your article link is a very quick and easy way to get content to more people. You can share with your institution, potentially in a university or a department newsletter, or with your press office. You could update your faculty webpage to include a link to your article. You should ensure that your manager or supervisor knows about it, and also rely on the library to spread word whenever you can. Work with your institution to ensure that readers across the board are able to access the content. Want to make sure that people are able to read the information that you're sharing with them. You can share it in a listserv. An easy way to share this again is to add it to your email signature so that anyone you have direct contact with will have a link to it. And of course, if it's appropriate, do add it to a course reading list or suggest it to a colleague who is teaching in that area. You should also update your publication history on LinkedIn, on academia, and ResearchGate, your institutional webpage. And it's a very quick, easy way to keep your CV updated. And you should start to engage on social media. If you see your journal, society, or publisher posting, please do like, comment, and reshare it. Similarly, engage with posts from your institution, co-authors, and colleagues about your work. We're saying this is more passive in the sense that you're not necessarily creating posts yourself, but more so commenting, resharing, and reposting content that already has been created by other people. So now to move on to promotion that requires more active engagement, we'll talk on these 4 main areas. Each requires work from you, but could result in a lot of positive attention and engagement. For example, when posting to Twitter or X or Facebook, make your messages personal. Use images and videos as they tend to be more engaging. Make sure to link to your content or other resources that support your content. You should let your community know about the success in publishing your article and give feedback and media attention, and any good feedback or media attention you might receive. Don't be afraid to be repetitive within reason. You need to know that social media moves fast, so sometimes it might feel repetitive on your end, but might not be for everybody else. Know the hashtags that apply to your article and your community and use them whenever appropriate. And make sure to reply to any responses and look for other mentions of your article online or on social media. You should share your accomplishments and successes on social media, but try to remain humble and not be too boastful. We encourage you to monitor responses and reply in a timely manner, but to do so in a respectful tone with an open mind. You can also use tweetorials or tweet threads, where authors are able to write multiple tweets relating to the same topic. This is a very useful way to reshare the content of your research. When you're drafting one, think about your main goal. And for example, is the main goal to share your main argument or possibly to add more context to your main points? Are you trying to develop your personal brand authority? Whatever you choose, be mindful at the onset and write your tweets accordingly. You can also use some other channels. We've got Mastodon, Instagram, YouTube. Some communities do rely on LinkedIn. Be sure to include your article in your profile as you build out as you build your career, and it should be representative of your CV. YouTube videos can be a really good way to spread news about your article. Some journals will create video abstracts with authors, and if the journal your article is published in does not, you could create your own to help publicize your article and promote it via social media. In addition, infographics, videos, or perhaps a visual abstract could work very well on Instagram, but do keep in mind that this platform doesn't support linking as easily as others. Instagram links can only be shared in a bio, not in a post. You can include links in your stories. And so if you create a story about an article, it should also link out. But by default, stories remain visible for 24 hours, but can be accessible on a user's highlight reel. A newer one is Mastodon, a free open source decentralized social media platform. Anyone can create their own version of Mastodon, known as a server, with rules and regulations that apply only to that version. Although Mastodon looks similar to Twitter or X, its user experience is more akin to that of Discord, a talking and texting app where people also join servers and have their own cultures and rules. Once you sign up for an account, you can post what are called toots, which are Mastodon's versions of tweets. You can also boost other people's tweets, the equivalent of a retweet. And with that, I'll pass off to Sophie to talk on conferences.
Thanks, Sean. As with social media, conferences are a crucial pillar of active promotion. You might be going to conferences in several different capacities, which is why I've broken these tips into 2 categories: attending conferences as a guest and attending them as a speaker. One of the most important things you can do when attending a conference as a guest is identifying the most suitable type for your research and objectives. Smaller society or practitioner-led conferences will provide greater scope for interactions with editors. In comparison, large discipline and society meetings can be more beneficial to boosting the reputation of presenting researchers and may attract more high-profile keynote speakers, so both have their advantages. Once you've defined the conference type most suitable for you, it'll provide the perfect opportunity to network. This might involve meeting a journal's editor-in-chief to promote your research and discuss methodology, or reaching out to publishing editors from Sage, who will also be able to pass on your contact information. Now, this next one is fairly self-explanatory, but preparing your questions in advance will allow you to seamlessly introduce your research into discussion in a tactful way, making a positive impression on your new contacts. As an attendee, your initial focus may be to focus and discuss your research with as many editors as possible, but speaking to your fellow researchers will widen your network and may open up new paths to collaboration. Bringing personal business cards and/or QR codes which link to your website or publication will guarantee that your research is easily accessible to journal staff. Try and make sure that your social media accounts, if you have them, are up to date with your latest information. Meet the Editor sessions are common at a variety of conferences, providing an invaluable chance to learn more from the journal from the editor themselves and to ask any targeted questions you may have. Lastly, even if you can't attend a conference in person, look out for resources online. For many reasons, it's not always possible to attend a conference physically, but many events now record their sessions and publish them digitally. This will allow you to experience key moments from the conference afterwards. There may also be digital programs, transcripts, or other resources that you can use. Next, we're going to look at attending conferences as a presenter. When deciding whether to present your research at a conference, you may want to consider how this will align with your long-term career goals. While presenting is beneficial whatever your field, if you have ambitions of attending a conference as a keynote speaker, be sure to attend conferences in your field regularly and take many opportunities to speak and present your work. By regularly contributing and networking in your field, you'll enhance your visibility and chances of being invited back. Cultivating a strong and engaged network of peers and a positive reputation as a skilled presenter will aid in your success. Conference sessions may take a variety of different forms. If you're leading a longer session or workshop, meaningful participant engagement is crucial to ensuring the knowledge that you impart is absorbed by your audience. Consider providing simple participant polls, short paired exercises, or using a case study to keep your session memorable. This will also help to build your confidence as a speaker. And as well as session durations and formats, you might also want to consider whether your research is best presented alone or in a team. If you're a graduate student or an early career researcher, co-presenting will help to gain experience in presenting in multiple formats. As Michael previously explained, rehearsing a concise summary of your research is a beneficial skill that will allow you to network effectively at conference dinners or closing events. If used in the lead up to your session, a successful elevator pitch might also help you gain a larger audience. Given the global nature of academia, using your online presence and institution channels to promote your conference is a great way of widening participation and attracting conference attendees to join your talk. As with business cards, feature a QR code in your research. That will ensure that your work is easily accessible and potentially driving up your web usage and future citations. These are all factors in what we would consider to produce a piece of high impact research. As you can see, conferences provide an abundance of opportunities for self-promotion, enabling you to build your reputation as a researcher, broaden your audience, and open up new pathways to publication. I definitely recommend investigating any upcoming conferences in your field to see how you can get involved. Next, we're going to look at writing a blog post. If you're interested in writing about your research in a blog post, some options you have include creating your own blog or reaching out to industry blogs. Sage actively maintains the Sage Perspective blog as a way to post content about articles. In addition to posts on trends in the publishing industry and other applicable topics. Whether writing for Sage Perspectives or another blog focusing on your article, keep the following tips in mind. Topical, timely, and recent research will receive the best reaction and will be the most likely to be accepted. Papers focusing on new or significant findings also tend to be the best fit for blogs. If you have a complex subject matter, be sure to explain it in a way that a public lay audience would understand and appreciate. Should your article be accepted for a blog post, create a draft and send along a headshot and bio as well for inclusion with your post. Be ready for a blog representative to review your post and potentially suggest edits or updates. Here you can see a case study demonstrating the impact of publishing a blog post on Sage Perspectives. The author marketing team coordinated a blog post written by the authors of a research article published in educational researcher on projecting the potential impact of COVID-19 school closures on academic achievement, as well as promoting the blog post across relevant social media channels. The blog post received over 730 unique page views, and the article has received over 35,000 accesses since publication on October 28, 2020. It also has an altmetric score of 377. Podcasting offers you a lot of opportunities too. Think critically. Do you have enough relevant information and resourcing to start your own podcast? Or do you think you'd be better as a guest panelist on an industry podcast? Consider if people outside your subject area will be interested in your topic. Ensure that you can speak about it clearly without any technical jargon, and potentially focus on the areas with the widest appeal. It's important to consider if you're a confident public speaker and what you can do to build up your confidence. Practice your discussion before going live and communicate openly with the podcast host as appropriate. These next materials can help expand the reach of your content to a non-academic audience, with content that can be easily understood. A plain language summary is similar to an article abstract in that it summarizes your writing in a succinct snippet, but a plain language summary is unique in that it's written without any technical terms or discipline-specific jargon. The intention is that anyone, whether in your discipline or totally outside of academia, can understand the overview of your research. Video abstracts and infographics provide a summary of key information and findings from an article abstract conveyed in a brief and graphic form. The aim of these is to assist researchers in quickly finding the most relevant article and allows them to visually evaluate whether they would like to pursue the article and delve deeper. These resources are valuable both pre- and post-publication and can be submitted with your article to undergo peer review. Post-publication, they can be used for promotion. They're easily shared on social media, in listservs, or with your colleagues. If you're interested in creating any of these, please check out Sage Author Services, where subject area experts will create them for you. As mentioned earlier, building your personal brand can go a long way to increase the reach of your research. There are a number of sites here which are dedicated to developing your author brand. You can create a profile on Web of Science Reviewer Recognition, formerly Publons, to track all of the review work you've done and how you've contributed to the field. It's an easy way to ensure that you get credit for the work you've done. On Kudos, you can link all of your published content, plus it's very easy to share all your content to social media platforms from there. When you claim your ORCID ID, you can ensure that all the content is linked to you. This is particularly helpful if there's another scholar who has the same name as you. You'll need an ORCID ID to submit to SageTrack for most journals, and it will automatically update your attributed publications on ORCID when the article is published. Create and maintain a well-organized author profile on Google Scholar as well. Even though most articles will automatically be indexed there, having an author profile enables researchers to better control the information that's shown up for each article. And perhaps even more importantly, it allows people who stumbled on one article from an author to explore other scholarship by the same and their collaborators. Overall, generating and maintaining profiles across these accounts will ensure that you are accurately credited for your work and will help you spread the reach of your scholarship. Now we've got a few more tips here. Can you write in more than one language? Is there an engaged audience who may or may not be able to read your content in English? If so, consider writing about your content in a different language. Social media is global, so write in multiple languages, or whatever language you'd like. In addition, some blogs like The Conversation have global offices and accept pitches in languages other than English. Similarly, should you reach your audience in whatever channel is most appropriate? We spoke today about social media, but if you're targeting a more niche audience, provide them with information where they're most active. Don't just focus on Twitter if your audience only uses Facebook, but instead devote your time to what's most important. Press releases are great ways to share information about your research. You can work with your institution to post, or you could share it somewhere on social media or on a personal website. And this can then be reshared across multiple channels. And now I'm going to pass on to Julianne to talk more about policy impact.
Thank you, Sophie. And thank you, Sean, for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Now that we've sort of heard a lot of great ideas about how to make the research more accessible and describe it, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the recipients of that research and sort of how to figure out a target audience. As Sean mentioned, FABS is an organization here in Washington, D.C. We really focus at the federal level. And one of our key objectives is to build support for our disciplines. And the way we do that is to show how it's useful to many of the goals of policymakers and sort of what they want to accomplish. So when thinking about policy impact, I think the real first question is, who can you send that blog post to? Who can you send that conversation article to? Who can you send that plain language abstract to? So for my first slide, I think the first step is really thinking about who's your audience. Who can, based on your research, who do you want to do what differently and how? And sometimes that's really hard to figure out. So I think it's also important to think about what's on their to-do list and sort of presenting your research in a way that helps them with their to-do list, rather than asking them to pay attention or care about your research for the sake of your research. I gave some prompts to even take a moment now and think about the research, maybe the article you've most recently submitted. And if there's anything that kind of helps answer that question, how do you figure out who that person is, who that audience is? And one thing I'll really encourage people to think about is, you don't have to have a solution. You don't have to have the silver bullet, although that's what policymakers often want. Rather, it's really useful if you're helping them understand the problem. It's really, I think there's lots of examples where policymakers come up with a solution before they really understand what the problem is. So I wouldn't underestimate that contribution from your insight. As Michael mentioned, this can be hard work and time consuming, but there are a lot of resources, Sean, on the next slide, that are available to you if this is something you're really interested in digging into. As Sean mentioned, FABS provides these resources, and we have a number of different things on our website. We have something called the Public Scholarship Toolkit. For those of you on U.S. institutions, and I'm not sure if there's internationally the same sort of resource, but there are government relation offices, and they are offices who know a lot about the federal policy landscape, the federal agencies working on different issues, the members of Congress, sort of what are the interests of the administration. And they are enormous resources that not a lot of people take advantage of. So you don't have to do all that homework yourself. If there's somebody either within your organization or your university who's already in that space, I encourage you, one, to ask them for help and feedback, or two, to make sure they're aware of the work that you're doing. And again, sort of leveraging the previous speakers and all of their good ideas about how to communicate your research. Think about who to send them to and how to be a little bit more proactive in sharing it. And in addition, there's a public scholarship toolkit and scientific societies. I mean, there's a range in terms of their size, but a lot of scientific societies have tremendous capacity in thinking through the potential impact and are eager to show the value of their sciences. So I think that any of your scientific societies that have government relations office or communications offices, I would encourage you to think of them as a resource as well. I've put together some at the state level too, for those of you in the United States. I know this is a real international audience, but wanted to make sure that you were aware that a lot of this is an emerging field, this idea of connecting the research to the policy and decision making. I feel that over the last 10, 20 years, we've developed a lot of new skills. There's a lot of new organizations. And so I would encourage you to think about reaching out to many of those.
So you've heard Julianne's spiel, and you find it convincing, and you want to be active in the policy sphere. But you feel like you're just shouting into the wilderness. How do you know that anything you've said has changed anything? How do you know you've turned any dial? How do you know it's like, what was the point? Well, at Sage, and a quick advertisement for Sage, is an independent company with a mission. We decided that we wanted to know this too, and we wanted to know it for you. we wanted to help shift this conversation from just citational impact and altmetric to your consumer impact to what kind of policy impact do you as an individual researcher have. And so we had friends at Overton, and Overton is a company that you and Adi there was the person behind altmetrics, but we teamed with them and with their huge, in fact, the world's largest searchable index of policy documents. And together with them, we said, why don't we make it possible for researchers to easily discover for themselves where their work is cited in policy? And better than that, why not let them do it for free? So we came up with Sage Policy Profiles. And again, it's powered by Overton. And right now, as of a couple weeks ago, they had 14 million documents from 188 countries where it searches, and it creates this dashboard for you that you are able to get to. By the way, don't jump at the bit. I know people like QR codes, and we're going to show one of those in a second so you can get this. But so we unveiled Policy Profiles. So and it's browser-based, so you can use it anywhere that you can have an internet connection, and you can easily discover and visualize citations of your work in policy documents. And it presents it, as I said, in an individualized dashboard. And importantly, it's something that you can export your data, and it's shareable, so you can present it to other academics, or perhaps if you're looking for tenure or promotion, this is something that you can grab and you can visualize and you can pass on and use for your own brand building. And it's again, it's powered by Overton. I stress that repeatedly because it's they are adding to this database continually. And this is one of the reasons that Sage exists from our founder, was to make academic material useful and important to the world. And so this kind of fits in with our mission. Again, I'm a little bit on advertising on this here, but this is an amazing tool, and it's absolutely free. And I say it's an amazing tool, and you go, yeah. He works in corporate comms for Sage, so of course he says that. So let me share a couple things. A professor of educational psychology in North Carolina says, Sage has a tool to see how often your work has been cited in policy documents. 32 times for me, which is 32 times more than I knew about. We had an academic in Canada who talked about his work that he found. It was in OECD, UNESCO, government sources, the Royal Society of Canada, etc. Things people did not know about. This is their academic material that they thought was just going into an academic venue, into an academic terrain, was being used in a wide-ranging and world-changing system, ecosystem. Here's something. Research impact is finally not about publications. This is from a marine biologist. And again, this tool is usable for everyone. We focus on social and behavioral science in my neck of the woods, but this is usable by any academic. It's finally not about publications, but rather the ways work is used. Finally, we have a decent tool to quickly collate some indicators of research impact on public policy. This will be super helpful for grants, awards, tenure, promotion, et cetera. And again, this isn't me speaking, this is me reading tweets. If we can go to the next slide, pass on. Here's a URL for this, see if you can capture it. We'll also have the link available, I'm sure, in when we post this on YouTube, et cetera, and other places you're looking at. But we'll kind of keep this up. Again, this is absolutely free. It only works for the individual, though, so you can't look up for other people. You can only do for yourself. But this is an incredible way to kind of create your own personal impact factor on how your work is genuinely impacting policy. And I think it's time to pass back to Sean.
Thank you, Michael. I'll keep this current slide up, but I'll continue to talk a little bit about what's coming next. So feel free to pull out your phone and scan the QR code to get started with signing up. We're about to move into the Q&A portion of our webinar today. So please do plug questions into the chat as they're coming through. My colleague Cassandra is busily typing away some responses to all of you that you'll have seen, but please do continue to post in there. Before we move into that, I wanted to just flag that How to Do Research and Get Published is continuing. We are a monthly webinar series. We've done about 30 webinars at this point, and we're continuing into 2025. So please do continue to join us. And I'll hop on to the next slide now, and we'll share the slides after the fact, so you'll be able to get the link if you haven't had a chance to do so. On January 8th, we will be doing a Back to Basics webinar on how to select a journal. So for anyone looking to get basic information, how to get published again, where to get started, this is a great one for you. We've also got a webinar in February on the breakdown of article types, and in March on how to write a manuscript. Again, going back to basics for anybody who's looking for a refresher. We have our journal information guide for authors. We've got information on how to get published, how you can share and reshare your content. For anyone who reads a simplified Chinese, we have a Chinese author gateway with translated content as well. So again, huge thank you. And let's go into the Q&A portion of today. So I've seen a number of really great questions coming through about access to content. And as you know, publishers, we have information sometimes behind paywalls, and that's not the case for all articles. Sometimes you can publish open access, which is freely available. But curious, how we have a question that came through: how can researchers share their article? One thing to note, Sage has a good green open access policy, which will allow you the ability to share more, and I'll share a link to this as well so you can get some more information. Julianne, do you have any information or any tips on how best to share your article with others?
Sure. In fact, I would advise against sharing an entire peer-reviewed journal article with policymakers and congressional staff. I remember when early in my career, when I was up on the Hill in a Senate office with somebody who described themselves as a reader, she said, "I'll read 4 pages," so to her, that was, a really long document. I think, sometimes the abstract works, sometimes the conclusion works. I will give a plug for a journal, a Sage journal that FABS has, which is Policy Insights from the Behavioral and Brain Sciences, where we ask people to give bullet points and recommendations. But I would definitely, instead of sharing the full article, I would share some sort of digest, or one of the things that either Michael or Sophie, recommended. If you do a blog, that's a great thing because it's more conversational. And I would share it very much in the context of what they're already focusing on, figuring out who your audience is and knowing what they care about, and then saying, this might be of interest to you and this might be helpful to you. So I've sort of gone beyond the question, but that's my 2 cents.
That's perfect. Thank you, Julianne. Great point. And again, really goes back to what we said earlier. Snippets, elevator pitches, all of that is super helpful as well. Some questions about conferences. So curious, we've got a number of people here from around the world. Conferences happen globally. So do you have any tips for how to promote yourself at a conference that you are unable to physically attend? Do you have any suggestions on how to continue to promote yourself and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I mentioned a little bit in my earlier discussion about how many conferences have digital resources now. So I definitely would start by looking in the say basically the conferences that we've got and seeing which ones are either digital only or have an online presence. If they're digital only, it will mean that you're able to attend virtually as things are happening. But the majority of conferences, even if they're not digital only, will have online recordings that you'll be able to watch. Or if you're trying to attend and raise your profile, then you'll be able to participate with those as well. Obviously, it's difficult to be mindful of things like time zones and time differences. So I would definitely make sure that you're working within your own capabilities. You don't want to have to wake up in the middle of the night to do a presentation. Obviously, it'd be better if it's only a few hours apart. So I definitely make sure to look at that. And yeah, I would really make the most of your online platform as well. If you're trying to attract attention worldwide, making the most of your social media, as we've said, is going to be really crucial for raising your profile. Some conferences also run prizes as well. So even if you're not able to attend, then they can talk about your work, and you may be able to have a presenter go into a bit more detail about that. I can't think of those off the top of my head, but I can try and have a look when Sean sends over the slides if there's anything appropriate. But yeah, I would say those are the main things that I would suggest. Look at online conferences, things that are near your time zone. Look for funding and prizes so that you can attend ones worldwide.
Great points. Thank you, Sophie. Julianne, I have a question for you. A number of people have been asking, again, this is a global audience, people outside of the US. So do you have any tips for how to impact global policy or perhaps some policy outside of the US? Is there anything maybe universal that you could recommend?
The only thing I can think about is asking yourself those questions about your research and trying to figure out who is in a position that might be able to do something differently and based on what you've learned, or who might think about a solution differently if they understood the problem better. I mean, I think that's universal, because sometimes it's, yeah, and I don't want to use state, but sometimes it's local, sometimes it's at the community level, sometimes it is, you know, the body equivalent to our Congress versus a agency, you know, and so I don't know of resources, and because every government is so different in terms of how those roles are divided, but I'll put some thought to that and try and get back to you. But I do think that idea of first asking yourself, rather than just sort of like putting it out there and hoping somebody finds it, is there someone in particular who might find this particularly useful, and then seeing where that leads you might be helpful as a place to get started.
Great, thank you, Julianne. I see a really great question that came through about how to bridge the gap between academia and policymakers. I think this is a really interesting one. So the person asked, do you have any practical guidance for how to bridge the gap between academia and policymakers? I know you shared some federal and state organizations who just don't know how to create that ultimate pathway. Do you have any tips for this?
Is that for me too?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yes, you know, it's interesting. I will mention too that recently people have contacted me, and before they even get started on new research projects, they're trying to figure out what are the questions that practitioners and policymakers have that would be useful to them. And so that's a very different approach than I think we've seen traditionally in academia, but one that I think is really exciting and encouraging for the future of evidence-based policymaking. I will again say to look at your available resources. I mean, one thing I really try not to do is to say to researchers, well, on top of the rigorous training, on top of the rigorous research, on top of all that you do to produce your journal article, now you have to do this all as well. And like I said, I think that we've seen a real evolution of these resources. If you happen to be in a academic institution, they do have a lot of resources there that are supposed to serve you. I find from my behavioral science colleagues, they don't always know about them, but I would encourage, like, if there's a government relations office or a communications office, they are in direct contact with the federal agencies and with the federal government in ways that you might not be aware of. So I think there are more resources there than a lot of us might know about. And sorry again for the US centric, that's just where my organization sits.
Thank you, Julianne. Yep.
John, can I add something to what Julianne said?
Please.
And it's something I actually learned from Julianne, and it's that policymakers are interested in what policymakers are interested in. They're not necessarily interested in what researchers are trying to sell them at any given moment. So you need to be paying attention, and I hate to say it, you need to, but you do. You, as an academic, you need to be paying attention to what is activating the policymakers at the moment and the questions that they have at the moment, and looking at your research and seeing if you can use that. If you can offer some advice to them because they're interested in it now. You may have an incredibly important finding, but if they're not interested in it now, they're not interested in it now, and it doesn't go anywhere. And the other thing that I'd like to talk just quickly about is something that runs a little bit counter to something that Sophie was talking about in trying to promote for newspaper journalistic purposes, but recency. It's just like you may have something that you did several years ago that's super pertinent now, and this is something that policymakers are interested in. Now, journalists may not be, and your colleagues may say, we already knew that, but it's always good when policymakers are talking about the thing that you know about, talk about it now and approach them at that point. And of course, you go to Julianne about how to approach them.
Thanks, Mike. Actually, if I could just respond to that too. to sort of underscore some of the important points that Michael brought up, is a lot of it too isn't just like, here's the answer and now there's suddenly policy is going to come out of it. It's building relationships, being a trusted resource, being able to sort of think with them sometimes or helping them understand something. And so that's really different, I think, than we think about it as well. We sort of, many of my members think, oh, my peer-reviewed journal article is done and, off it goes. And but talking about it, having this ongoing conversation, I think is really helpful. And then instead of maybe Googling, they'll call you and they'll say, can you explain this to me? And so sometimes it's not even with an agenda, it's just letting them know that you're a resource, you're somebody who's interested in this, you're willing to talk to them about it, just sort of building on Michael's point.
Great, thank you, Julianne, and thank you, Michael. We have a question here that I think is really interesting. We've mentioned personal support from Sage and some strategies and suggestions across the board. And the questions about how to access this help. So I could speak to this, I think, maybe in tandem with Sophie a little bit. So I work on the author marketing side and Sophie works on the journal marketing side. So the two of us kind of tackle this from both sides. Sage is here to support your work and to support the marketing and the support of your individual article. Your article is included in all of our journal level marketing. It's across the board. It's included in many different campaigns to really drive usage and get that impact there. On the author side, of course, we want to support you, and we've discussed all this information about how to do it. The blogs, we have social media support, we have all of these other avenues. For us, you can access that on our website, our Sage Journal Author Gateway. Lots of tips and tricks for you to use, guides, resources, PDFs, all of that to really flesh this out. I think it's overwhelming. There's a lot of, to be honest, there's a lot of things that you can and should do, but I think that you should think about it very personally and what you are able to do and what you want to do, and also, very importantly, where your audience is and what type of support you can get from them. It's really important to develop yourself in an area where you'll see the most impact versus an area that will be time-consuming and you won't see that impact. So really thinking very critically from the onset, making sure you're doing the right thing at the right time. Sophie, is there anything that you'd like to add to that, or do you think that I've kind of covered that?
Probably just one or two extra things that have occurred while you were speaking. So obviously a lot of our resources are online, and I think Sean touched upon something that's really key, which is about spending your time where it's going to be most valuable for you, and really finding your niche. So one of the resources that Sage has online are our discipline hubs, which you can access via our journals homepage. And what those do is those break all of the journals down into the relevant disciplines. So, for example, business and management or cardiology and cardiovascular medicine, just two off the top of my head. But what you can do within those will gather not only journals, but they are also absolutely full of resources that are specific to that field. So they'll have things like relevant podcasts, calls for papers, calls for editors, and conferences as well. So once you know the exact field you're in, it makes it a lot easier to actually search through all of the materials available. And I would also say, I know that some of us are less on social media now these days, but definitely places like X is still where a lot of people are going to post their earliest mentions of calls for papers and further opportunities like that. So I would say trying to stay online is something that's going to be really helpful, especially if you're really trying to sort of break into it as an early career researcher. Those are probably the two key things I would suggest. Thanks, Sean.
Great, thank you, Sophie. I see a very interesting question, and I think it's very important. So for people who are shy about self-promotion, do you have any tips to overcome the psychological barrier? Really good question. I think we covered a few different things that I find personally helpful. Practicing a speech or maybe an elevator pitch on your article is a really good way to do this. Really become confident and comfortable in that subject area. Potentially starting with people who you have good relationships with. Yeah, but I'm happy to pass it off to my panelists for any additional thoughts.
I'll jump in actually, and this is sort of something Michael said before too. It's like when I am trying to figure out how to talk about our sciences, I'll see sort of what's a priority. So whether it's like trying to improve reading scores or trying to reduce youth mental health, and then come at it with, here is science that's helpful to you. And so it's not self-promotion. You're actually sharing your research in a way that can help somebody with something, with a problem they're trying to solve. And so that's sort of just a reframe. I mean, you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it in service to a shared goal. And I find that that just changes the conversation completely. And so if you can think about your research in that way, it won't feel so self-promotion-y, but you know, more of a problem solver or somebody who's trying to help.
Yeah, and I think too, don't think of it as self-promotion. Think of it as sharing your passion. Why did you get involved in whatever it is you're doing? You did it for a reason, and many academics aren't fabulously rich, so you didn't do it for the money. You did it because you actually cared about something. You were interested in something. So share that. And another thing is, don't try and do something that you're totally uncomfortable with. If you're not comfortable with your face up somewhere, like my face is right now, and that makes you uncomfortable, don't do that. Do social media, do blog posts, do something else. If you're not comfortable with your writing, but you really feel like you're a dynamic personality, then do things that put you out somewhere in real time. But go to where you're comfortable. You don't have to do everything, and you're not going to do everything well unless you're exceptional, unless you're a unicorn. You're not going to do everything perfectly. So find that the areas that you can do well, or where you're, more importantly, where you're comfortable and where your passion can shine through.
Yes, for sure. That's a great point. Yeah. Another good question that came through is about personal brand building. So someone asked, how do I use a published article to build a brand? I can start the conversation here just to say that a published article in the topic shows, as Michael kind of said, you're building on your personal brand here. You're showing your area of expertise and also your area of interest. So you're really developing who you are as a researcher, and thinking about, you know, a published article is just one step in it, right? You're building out this wider umbrella of who you are, and you speak at conferences on it. You post on social media. You do these small scale things, theoretically. And you're really starting to develop yourself as a name within that field. I think that's just small incremental steps on how to do so. I'm wondering if any of my other panelists would like to speak on this or flesh it out a little bit more.
I think something along those lines is that you're not building on one article either. You're building on your area of expertise. That article is the distillation of that. It's the gem. It's in the setting that you've put out. But the reality is that you're an expert in an area. And so use that and kind of create and become a public intellectual on that. And I know that public intellectual has certain negative resonances for some, but it's actually a thing to strive for. It's you're the person that knows about this thing. So why not be the person that talks about this thing? And one thing I think is incredibly important, if you do not step up and talk about what you know, somebody else is, and that other person may have stuff that you think is suspect or you may disagree with or something else. If you have a specific insight, you're the one that needs to share that specific insight. So even if you are shy or you are a little bit retiring about it, it's important to the world at large.
Absolutely. I also draw upon what I was mentioning earlier about things like if you're going to promote it online, really look into things like the plain language summaries, especially if you're trying to widen your audience. Because chances are, if your article's been published, you're well on the way to getting into the audience of your field. But I think if you want to widen that and look at sort of engaging, a broader audience, a global audience, look at how you can present things in a way for people who don't necessarily speak English as their first language, for the global field. So absolutely, I would say things like the plain language summary, and the infographics as well, anything that could be relevant. Really lean into the multimedia if you're comfortable with it.
Great point, Sophie. Thank you so much. Well, I think with that, we're going to wrap up for the day. But before we do, I wanted to share a note that I saw from Alicia in our Q&A. They wrote, they started using Sage policy profiles as part of their CV, although maybe while not impressive, it communicates a different message in terms of what I value about my research. And I think that genuinely really underscores a lot of what we've spoken about. I'm sure it is impressive regardless of whether or not you think it is, because at the end of the day, you're making a stance in your area of expertise, which is impressive. But again, it really does underscore a lot of what we're discussing today about building out your brand, showing what matters to you and showing what matters to your subject area. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. With that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today in our webinar. Thank you to Julianne for joining us, Michael, Todd, and Sophie as well. We hope to see you in a future webinar. Again, we're restarting again in January, and we have a full year of webinars planned for you. So we hope to see you again. And in the meantime, please take care.
Thank you.
Bye.